So it's with great pleasure that I can introduce former Congressman Rush Holt to deliver our keynote address today. And for an event like this that's focused on discussing how scientists can better advocate for ourselves from a range of different directions, whether that's the entire scientific community, looking into ways that we can advocate for different funding mechanisms for science, or if it's from the perspective of individual groups within science who are looking to make a positive change within our own community. I think it's really hard to imagine anyone in a better position to talk to us at all of these levels, because Rush has really lived every single side of this debate, this equation. So Rush holds a PhD in physics from New York University, and he utilized this as a faculty member at Swarthmore College and as assistant director of Princeton University's Plasma Physics Laboratory, which is a national laboratory run by the Department of Energy, I believe. Is that right? So he also has used his physics background in various other ways, including as an arms control expert at the US State Department, where he monitored the nuclear programs of countries that included North Korea and the former Soviet Union. So I'm sure that there are some pretty good stories that he might be able to tell from that time, or not. But you can try and pry it out of him if you want. So during his time as an academic, Rush spent 2 years as an American Association for the Advancement of Science and Technology Fellow, and we've heard from a few other AAAS S&T Fellows today as well. And this seemed to, I guess, looking at his bio, serve as sort of really set the stage for the next stage of his career, which was serving as a member of the US House of Representatives for 16 years. So during this extended time in Congress, he was an incredibly strong advocate for federal investment in science and research and development, for science education, and for innovation. And this led to a really long list of prestigious awards and honors that he has received based on this, and that's long enough so that I'm going to leave you to look up all of the details of that in your own time. But last year, as Rush left his position in Congress, he became the CEO of AAAS and the executive publisher for the Science family of journals. So he's also currently serving on the steering committee for Rescuing Biomedical Research, which is a group of very impressive scientists who are aiming to solve a lot of critical problems that are facing the scientific research enterprise. And so without further ado, I would like to welcome Rush Holt.
Thanks. Well, I'm delighted to be here, delighted to see so many people here. I got here toward the end of the last session, and it was wonderful to see how engaged this audience is, partly because I think some of you feel driven to take your science out into society, and I certainly applaud that and look forward to talking with you about that. I accepted the invitation to come here not knowing what you wanted to hear, or really what the symposium was about. But because I wanted to hear from you about an initiative I'm trying to carry forward at the American Association for the Advancement of Science, AAAS, which is serving young scientists. I'll say some words. In fact, most of my slides are about AAAS, but I want to use these to set the stage for a discussion of policy, politics, advocacy, science in society. And I'm counting on you to take the conversation there. So I do want to find some time to talk with you, maybe not in this setting, but otherwise, whether remotely or in person, about what AAAS can and should be doing to help young scientists deal with what you have to deal with. Because AAAS is the world's foremost and largest general science membership organization. Been around 170 years. Taken part in some of the most important moments in science, science policy, science education. AAAS was founded in 1848 when some geologists and plant biologists got together, abolished their disciplinary societies so that they could form a general interest society. Science, the word itself, was only coming into common usage at about that time, a decade or two earlier. And they recognized that this country, it says American, but today we're very much an international organization. 20% of our members are from outside the United States, but they realized that at that time, this country, in order to get ahead, had to look after the health of science more than the disciplinary parts. And one of the take-home points that I want to leave with you is, although it's true, as the preceding panel said, if you are lobbying with a policymaker or a legislator or a politician, you do have to have a specific ask. But what this society needs is a general education in science, to get a sense of what science is all about, how it works, what it needs to thrive. And I'll come back to that. And AAAS has 24 disciplinary sections, from anthropology to computer and information science, engineering, medical sciences, and so forth, so that it is multidisciplinary, but it is also very much interdisciplinary. And a second point I wanted to make for a take-home is, if you want to do advocacy, it really helps if you affiliate yourself with like-minded people. And AAAS actually provides a framework. We have, over the years, done advocacy. Under my leadership, I hope we will be doing a lot more. And yes, you, as one of the questioners in the last session was suggesting, you could set up appointments with a legislator or a town councilor or an agency staff person in a regulatory agency, say, and maybe get your input. But banding together is much more effective. So I'm talking to you about AAAS not just because I think it's a great organization. I hope you will join. There are real benefits to join apart from advocacy. But if you are here to do advocacy, look for like-minded people to do it with. The turnout here suggests that right here there is no shortage of such people. I don't know how like-minded you all are, but at least you are interested in doing advocacy. So that's great. So let me say a little bit about AAAS and make some detours and diversions along the way. 100,000 members, all sorts of disciplines, including some who are not scientists and from no scientific discipline. We publish 6 journals. You probably know Science Magazine. This brand new issue happens to be about translational plant biology. Some interesting pieces in there on that. and many other things at the same time. It's a great journal for browsing, even though nobody seems to browse anymore. So that's something we face. Anyway, Science has wide readership and truly great prestige. AAAS does other things, though, besides publishing. We hold meetings. There's a big annual meeting with thousands of attendees and a number of other meetings that we convene. One of our strengths is convening, so that back in the, kind of looking back over history, the meetings that gave shape to what was going to be this legislatively created organization that we now know as the National Science Foundation, those meetings took place at AAAS. And so we convene and communicate. It's explicitly part of our mission and goals to foster communication among scientists and between scientists and the public. A number of societies, most of your professional societies, are affiliated with AAAS formally. We seek to engage the public and build appreciation and trust for the idea of science. And that is where I think we have a pressing need today. This country really has a long tradition of appreciating science. The American culture has been very empirical. Our actual founding as a country, the Constitution, were very empirical. If you look at the Federalist Papers, the word experiment appeared far more often than the word democracy, for example. So the idea that evidence counts has been part of our society and culture, and to some extent our policy, until recently. I actually think I see some real erosion in that. It's not just that we have millions of people denying climate change and its causes. It's not just that most high school students do not get a good treatment of evolution in their biology courses. It's not just that millions of Americans deny their kids vaccinations, and millions more say that's okay if that's what the family wants to do. It is that generally there seems to me to be an erosion of what I would call the American reverence for science, reverence for evidence. People still will quickly say, if you do surveys, in large numbers, they will say, oh yeah, science is good, I support science. If you ask any legislator on Capitol Hill in Washington, they'll say, oh yeah, science, it's good. It's, they'll probably say, I love science, right? There's some confusion between technology and science. But what is missing in these sometimes empty approving statements of science is an understanding of, well, what is evidence? What constitutes good evidence? How is evidence curated? How is it collected? How is it validated and verified? And that is a challenge that we are trying to address, building an appreciation for science, and to see that scientific evidence is embedded, integrated in the policymaking process. And we try to speak on the related issues. Our mission and goals, I think, are really inspirational and very wide-ranging, from communication to trying to establish and uphold high standards for the practice and application of science, to look after the pipeline, not only to see that the pipeline is full of scientists, engineers, technologists for the future, but that we address the serious problem of diversity. There's a real question whether the face of science can become diverse enough soon enough. It's not just a matter of political correctness or even humaneness. There will be a major disconnect between what we are doing and the rest of society if we don't do better in diversity. And as I say, we are always interested in where science fits in society. Communicating science, one of the principal ways we do this is through Science Magazine. An interesting story is that Alexander Graham Bell and his uncle and some others founded Science Magazine. Thomas Edison got involved soon. The magazine was floundering. Just before the 20th century, Thomas Edison brought it to AAAS and said, could you take this? And in a sense, the rest is history. Because we were a membership organization, we could do it. And it's an important reminder to I think, to us and to everyone, that we are, by charter, in our essence, a membership organization. But the communication is not only through our 6 journals, but we give the most coveted journalism awards each year for newspaper reporting, for children's science writing, for broadcast science reporting. We have mass media fellowships. If you listen to NPR, you might know Richard Harris or Joe Palca or or the Science Times. There are a number of New York Times science writers who spent a summer when they were undergraduates in a program that AAAS has been running for decades to help scientists communicate better their science and to help writers understand the science better. Eureka Alert it's a service we've provided for decades now where science writers go to get their story ideas. Now we have a fairly active social media communication operation. We're interested in, as I say, in high standards in the practice of science, trying to remove implicit bias in grant making and in publishing, to strengthen the peer review process, and to try to defend against mindless attacks on science. There was some decades ago a senator who gleefully every month offered the Golden Fleece Award, where he said the public is being fleeced by supporting these worthless science projects. And he had not much difficulty finding titles of NSF or DOE or other funded research that sounded silly. So in response, a member of Congress, Jim Cooper from Tennessee, started a few years ago and something called the Golden Goose Awards. And AAAS and some other societies picked this up, where next week we will recognize the importance of the research project entitled The Sex Life of the Screwworm. Yes, you could imagine that is appropriate for ridicule. Well, it turns out it has saved ranchers billions of dollars by, obviously getting these pests to mate with sterile partners. You can wipe out an entire generation. And we will also recognize a longitudinal study that's been carried on by University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, looking at, it's a survey of now millions, I guess, or at least hundreds of thousands, of adolescents on their risky behavior. Well, you can imagine members of Congress had a lot of fun criticizing this prurient look into the sexual behavior of teenagers. Well, it turns out this has been one of the most important sociological studies of the last 50 or 60 years. And there's an added dividend that the researchers have now learned about early onset cardiac disease because they collected DNA from all of these, all of the participants in the survey, and have now put it to modern use. We have been the convener of the Human Rights Coalition for decades, getting scientific societies that are concerned about human rights to band together to look after the human rights of scientists around the world, but also to see that good science is applied to the defense of human rights around the world. We've had some programs, for example, in satellite analysis and now remote sensing to understand government bulldozing of villages in Myanmar and that sort of thing. I'll skip over some of our educational activities, except I did want to call attention to the last 2 points. The next to last point is what I wanted to talk with you about, at least on the side. It's an initiative that I'm very interested in carrying forward at AAAS. I've put it under the title, What They Don't Teach You in Graduate School. There are many things in that I think would be worth knowing about communication, about legislative and appropriations process, about lobbying, advocacy, about ethics in the practice and applications of science, career alternatives, and options, and what is the accessibility of those alternatives, and how might you plan for them. Research and intellectual property. So many things that are not taught in graduate school that a young scientist should know. And I want to take this on the road. We do it in bits and pieces now for young scientists, and I'm hoping to expand on that. The catalyzing advocacy is something that 50 or 60 universities now subscribe to, where they send 2 grad students each year to Washington for a course that we give, a few days, of some of those things that I was talking about. Legislative process, public engagement, communication, and advocacy. And those students go back to their universities. We've been doing it for a few years now, and many of the students are following through on their pledge to make something of this when they get back to their universities. I think that's going nicely. You've heard today about the Science and Technology Policy Fellows. I was one when I was at Swarthmore with Janet Conrad, who's sitting up here. She was a student when I was on the faculty there. I took a leave and spent a year on Capitol Hill, sponsored by the American Physical Society and the AAAS. Little did I know I would be running it some decades later. And it was a great experience. In this case, working on Capitol Hill. Last week, we just sent off the class, this year's class of 160 new PhD level scientists to work in all branches of the federal government. Several dozen on Capitol Hill, where they will work in committee or personal offices, House and Senate. 40-some that will go to the State Department, a similar number to USAID, some to NIH, NSF, Corps of Engineers, Justice Department, and the judicial branch. And another 100 fellows who will be doing it for a second year, because some of these fellowships are 2 years in duration. This program, now approaching its 45th year, has brought technical expertise to the policymaking and, very important, brought political savvy back to the professions for those fellows who returned to their science. And what was not appreciated at the time this program was created, but now that more than 3,000 people have gone through the fellowship program, it has made career alternatives respectable. When I did this 30-some, more than 3 decades ago, going on 4 decades ago, I was excited to do it. But it's not it was at that time not necessarily a career advancing strategy. Nowadays, it has come a long way, so that the engineering departments, the scientific organizations, and universities might think that this is a feather in your cap to have spent a year as a policy fellow. So we've come a long way in that. One of the former fellows is now the science advisor to the Secretary of State, to John Kerry. And he worked for AAAS for a few years and helped us advance something that we've been promoting for decades called science and diplomacy. It's not a new idea. It goes back to Benjamin Franklin. But it was not recognized how much science brings to diplomacy, or if done right, can bring to diplomacy, and how much diplomacy can bring to science. As you think about where you might advocate, don't forget the international part of this. Working with international agencies, NGOs, for good policies that are based on scientifically founded evidence is very much needed. For years, AAAS has called itself the voice for science. I've modified that now to say we want to be the force for science. So when you talk about advocating for science, yes, we do advocate for good funding for the NIH and the Department of Energy and NOAA and NIST and so forth. But we are not a guild or union where we're looking after the welfare of people in lab coats. Our job is to advocate for science as it benefits all people. So yes, we lobby for the funding for research and development to go forward, but we also advocate for the conditions, the environment in which research and development can thrive. And we advocate for international relations where the freedom to investigate and to pursue ideas, even unpopular ideas about teenage sex habits or sex life of screwworms, can go forward. And it is, I think, well, actually, let me back up and just say one more word. Among the things we do, and among the tools that you may well want to use as you advocate, is the analysis we do of the budget, of the research and development, the support for research and development. And I have a couple of samples here of slides we've made. These are recent updates of things we've done for years. On the right, you see that federal research and development as a share of our economy, of the gross domestic product, is less than half of what it was in the 1960s. Now, some people try to explain that away and say, well, there was a moonshot underway then. Well, there's a moonshot underway now, too. It's just different terminology. It is unmistakable that the federal support for research and development is much less than it used to be. And I would argue is much, much less, not by percentage amounts, but by factors of what it should be in our society. We are nowhere near diminishing marginal returns on investment in research and development. Private sector, public sector, add it all together. We could benefit greatly from much more investment in research and development. But I argue for that, not for full employment of scientists, but for what science brings to people who will not just get the technological benefits of that research, but will learn to appreciate decision-making based on evidence. That is the primary spin-off from research and development, I would argue. And that's what I hope will be the force that you will advance for science. So with that, let me just say a little bit more about my time in Congress. It was great. I did it for 16 years. The hardest thing I've ever done in my life, and I've done a lot of different things, a checkered career, I guess you might say. And one of the things I learned that was troubling is that to policymakers and to members of Congress, science and scientists are just another interest group. I would argue, many of you might argue, that science is really special. It is the pathway to the most reliable knowledge on public matters. They don't see it that way. I joined in a press conference the other day with a former presidential science advisor and former head of the National Science Foundation to argue that the next administration, whoever that is, crossing my fingers, will early appoint a science advisor. And of course, the transition teams And most of the political journalists and most of people in Washington will say, oh, the president has appointed a science advisor. He's taken care of the science constituency. Well, it's not the science constituency that needs that science advisor. When September 11th, 2001 came around, almost a year into the new administration, there was not in place a permanent science and technology advisor. When the anthrax spores were sent through the mail a few weeks later, killing some postal workers and contaminating congressional offices and journalism newsrooms, there was not a science advisor in place. And it was not for reasons that would have been thought of as science, something that would be sent to the jurisdiction of the Science Committee in Congress. It was not for those reasons that we needed a science advisor. It was for reasons of understanding biological terrorism, for reasons of understanding biomarkers and understanding the domestic surveillance. If we had had a science advisor, I would like to think, like the science advisor we have now, who I think is quite good, we would have had better coordination of the investigation of the anthrax attacks. It was terribly uncoordinated. In fact, the FBI botched it. I've said that publicly. And so the argument that we made the other day that the next administration should have a science advisor, I think will be dismissed as some scientists making their special interest case. So keep that in mind. It's one of the limitations you have to work against. We have to first build an appreciation of what science is about and why it is special before they will say, yes, science has a place in issues of justice, that science has a place in economics. I mean, after all, when was the last time you heard anybody say, in the middle of an argument, a political, economic argument, now wait a minute, science, that economics is supposed to be an empirical science. What is your evidence? Economic arguments in Washington and probably in your apartment building or wherever are made on the basis of ideology from beginning to end rather than examined evidence. So that's one thing that I wanted to say, is to be sure to understand that unless you're able to change the ground on which your discussions take place, you will be seen as just a representative of just another interest groups. And I'm not just talking about Congress. If you're working with the town council, if you're working with the local school board. A second point I would make for your advocacy, I'm assuming you want to do some advocacy, is to remember what they told me in the week of orientation when I was a congressional fellow going on 4 decades ago. One of the speakers said to us, who we thought we were professional scientists. He said, you have to understand that here in Washington, facts are negotiable. And yeah, we laughed nervously, squirmed in our seats, wondering what we had gotten ourselves into for a year. But he wasn't kidding, nor was he being dismissive. It means there's a lot to think about there. I won't exhaust that subject. I leave that with you for a take-home exercise to figure out what he might have meant by saying the facts are negotiable. So when you go in to an advocacy situation, you are not there to give them the facts. First of all, that's insulting. The worst kind of science communication is to say, I'm an expert, you're not. Let me tell you what the facts are about climate change, about gun violence, about you name it. It won't work, and that's not really your job. Your job is to help that person understand that she or he can appreciate evidence for herself. That she or he can ask the questions that you would ask. Well, did these glaciologists and ocean current experts collect the data well when they're looking at climate change? Did they have good custody of the evidence? And was it verified? You're not there to tell them that it was. You're there to help them understand that they can determine that. Just as you could determine that, not being an expert about glaciology or oceanography. You can ask the questions, is this based on evidence that appears to have been collected well, kept well, examined well, and verified? A number of other things I can say about interaction with policymakers, but I do want to make the point that advocacy is not just for Congress. It's not even just inside the Beltway in Washington. If you want to be involved in seeing that science is brought to bear on issues of public concern, you can do that in any number of places. And you should. I think I'll leave it at that and see what's on your minds.
Thanks a lot for your talk. I was wondering if you could speak a little more to what you started off by saying on the change in society and how we value or don't value the facts, or value or don't value evidence. And I was wondering if you could just shed a little bit more light on that. What are the societal or cultural forces that have been at play over the last, I don't know, is it 50 years that that's happened? And why? And what can we do about it? Because I really appreciate also what you mentioned, that the Constitution, that the Federalist Papers, the very DNA of our nation is really based on experimentation and science and empiricism and these wonderful traditions that a lot of science is based on. So how did that stream, in a sense, get lost? And do you have any insights into that, just broadly?
I have some fairly random thoughts on it, and I won't subject you to them. It is, you'll get an argument from other people. It is not, and I'm guessing at the ages of some of you, and I think that this trend began before you were following these things. I really believe that trend is there, but not everybody does. As I said, if you have an opinion survey of the American people or people elsewhere in the world, they will say they value science. They will even get excited about the Pluto flyby and the direction of gravitational waves. But as I was saying, then they get in an argument about economics, and it begins and ends with ideology, which I think of as pre-baked opinions. And so that they, and I gave the examples of climate change, evolution, vaccination. Those are all, I wouldn't say fringe. It's certainly not a majority of Americans in any one of those categories, or on any one of those topics, is thinking really unscientifically. But I just think there's been an erosion. Where did it start? I don't know. One idea that I've tried out is 1958. In 1957, the Soviet Union launched the Sputnik satellite. It panicked America. Now, it was just a little sphere about like this that all it could do was beep. But there was a fear that from above, they not only could see everything, but could drop stuff on us. And besides, we were losing the arms race. So it had that symbolic effect. And as a result, within months, there was passed in Congress with great public fanfare the National Defense Education Act. It was a reform of the curriculum, the science and math curricula. It gave rise to the School Mathematics Study Group and the BSSC biology courses and PSSC physics courses. And there was a national movement to create a generation of scientists and engineers, the likes of which the world had never seen. And they left behind most of the rest of the country, the other 80%, saying, we're going to train the next generation of scientists, and we did very well, and forgot that the other 80% of the students who are not going to be scientists professionally need to understand this stuff too. It may have begun there. Yeah.
Sure. Hi. So I'm Kristen. I'm a postdoc in the biology department. I'm also one of the co-founders of Academics for the Future of Science, and I have about 800 questions for you, but I'm going to try to pare it down to one. So I think one of our major goals is also one of your major goals that you're talking about, which is science funding. Also educating grad students better on alternative career options and things like that. So I think what we have to offer is that, we have a mechanism to try to band thousands of young scientists together. And we're having online dialogues about some of these issues and policy in general. And so I guess what I'm wondering is, how can we talk better with you and have a dialogue with AAAS? I know that there's the Science and Technology Policy Fellowships, which are great. But if young researchers don't want to spend a year doing that, but they still want to have a dialogue, how can we dialogue with you? And what would you ask us to do to speak with the public and with policymakers and give voice to educating the public and policymakers better about science and what science is all about?
Well, this is, a direct ask. Join AAAS. What does it cost a student, Adam? Do you know? Adam is new at AAAS, so I put him on the spot. And you not only belong to an esteemed organization, but you also get some fine benefits. But No, I think, at our annual meeting, which will be held in Boston in February, we have a number of sessions on just these things, and a lot of other things besides. We have seminars and other meetings over the course of the year. We have a big science policy meeting in Washington every April. So getting involved in some of our committees, our section on implications of science for society, and so forth. Those are things to do. There isn't yet a single place that you log into or that you call up where we will give you an advocacy kit. But we're actually working on that. Ways, and that's what I wanted to talk with you about more specifically. How can we set things up not only to have a curriculum on what they don't teach you in graduate school, but a network forming mechanism to put that to use.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be great to discuss that for sure. One thing that just pops into my mind is some sort of online discussion forum where you can sort of hear from us in mass and we can hear from you and have an ongoing dialogue.
Yeah, we do have, a service that we're providing now is called Trellis, which is it's an online platform for collaboration that I think is going to prove to be easy to use and really will foster that kind of communication. There are a number of, it's in beta phase now, and there are a number of groups in the thousands now of people using Trellis for that kind of interaction. We more, actually, if you join, you get the Trellis link, but it's not restricted to members.
Okay.
There's a lot more to discuss there. Yeah, good. Thanks.
I won't have the mic.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Jacob Colbert. I'm a physics grad student here, so I've been an admirer of yours for a while. I was wondering, going back to what you were saying about something like the AAAS fellowship starting to be a feather in your cap. I was wondering, is the AAAS doing anything, and should other people be doing anything to push the culture of universities and departments to see policy as a professional service?
Yeah, we don't now have a concerted plan to reach academic departments to open their eyes, or whatever, however you might look at it. We're doing it, I guess, more generally with the hope and expectation that academic departments will come to embrace it. That may be misguided. Academic departments are usually not centers of change. So we may need to work on a more concerted plan.
Thanks.
Thanks. Yeah. The CASE program, that I was talking about is a little bit of that. And what's interesting is the university administrations at these 50 or 60 universities actually send 2 students each to each year to the CASE workshop.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, you were?
Yeah.
Okay. Did I describe it right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Good. Okay. Great. Thanks. Yeah. Oh, it's okay.
We're not going to be able to take all
I'll try to be a lot quicker. Sorry.
I'll try to make mine hopefully simpler. Well, maybe not. Alec Widge, I'm an assistant professor over at Harvard. And one of the things you talked about a little bit was changing the conversation and changing the game. And one of the things I've learned over my career in advocacy is one of the ways you do that is by changing who's playing the game. I mean, the fact is we don't have anybody in Congress who's what you were for us for a long time. And also, from my experience, somebody in this room is someday going to run for public office, maybe more than one of us. And when that happens, one of the best things we can do for ourselves as a profession and discipline is support that person. But there's also that relationship we spent all that time to build with the person who's the incumbent in the office, and you know from your time in Congress that the incumbent almost always wins, no matter what. I guess the question is, and I'm trying to draw a little bit on your experience here. Is there a way to have our cake and eat it too a little bit, to look for and cultivate the people among us who really want to take that ultimate advocacy step without angering the people who are already there and are kind of sometimes our friends?
Oh, sure. I mean, right now there's a former science and S&T policy, AAAS S&T policy fellow running in Colorado. There are several, a couple at least, in state legislatures. By the way, there is another PhD research physicist in Congress, Bill Foster from Illinois. There were 3 of us. Actually, when I came, there was somebody there already. We independently each did the calculation, figuring at this growth rate, the entire Congress would be physicists by mid-21st century. But anyway, that's the fallacy of extrapolation. But anyway, of course you can. You first have to overcome the hurdle that so many scientists think, I can't do politics. Just as so many politicians think, I can't do science. I can't begin to understand it. It's hard. You really have to work at it. It is, you have to like people. And so, that rules out some people.
It also confirms which of the 2 you're talking about.
But you can, you can do it. Congress, outside of student government, Congress was the first office I ran for. Now, I lucked out in several ways, and I could go into more detail about that. You can do it. And I would encourage people to do it. It generally helps to run for town council first, and to build a constituency, not to mention build support from a political organization.
Hi. So along the lines of not just advocating for science to other advocates, but actually switching that and advocating for advocacy within to scientists and how you're able to do that. So in your experience with those 50 or 60 universities that you said have employed the CASE program, have you heard any initiatives that are being done there to maybe influence that there? And then aside from that, I believe John McNerney from California is the only other representative who has a PhD in math, I believe. Has anyone that's left in Congress decided to really take up the mantle?
Yeah, it's Jerry McNerney. But
I'm sorry, Jerry, I'm sorry.
Yes,
I'm
right.
sorry.
Yeah. In fact, a number of the CASE students have gone back to their universities, and in a sense, the charge to them, and I should ask the former participant in the CASE program to verify this, but the charge to them is to go back to your university, work with other science students to help them appreciate that they can and should do these advocacy-related things. So yes, it certainly is growing, and there's no question that there are some senior people you can find some at almost any university who really get this stuff, who really believe this stuff. I mean, one of the problems, though, is it used to be that you could do this after you had your Nobel Prize. You could afford to leave the lab and do these so-called unscientific things. That's changed. That clearly has changed.
You brought up very briefly in the beginning ethics, scientific ethics, and I was wondering a little bit how much, how constructive that debate is in the legislative level, particularly some of the new bad areas of scientific ethics. In particular, something that's been cropping up, especially over the last 2 years, has been scientific racism, and I'm just wondering what the how many a general sense of if there is real subscription to that kind of bad science in Congress, and yeah, if the discussion on scientific ethics is productive there.
Well, in legislatures around the world, not just in the U.S. Congress, so in local and municipal and national, federal legislatures, there has been from time to time over many years, and there is more and more efforts to legislate the ethics of science. That's a little bit dangerous. It's hard to legislate ethics, and if it's done without an understanding of how science works, that can lead to problems. But it's high time that we have codes of conduct having to do with sexual harassment, for example. I mean, it is just, what's coming to light now in many places around the country is appalling. And so some legislators are trying to put legislation in place to deal with that. On other aspects having to do with peer review, there have been some attempts to do this. It's really hard to do if people don't understand how publications work. That's one of the problems they've gotten in, problems that have been created with the move toward open access publications. It's based on a good principle and a good aspiration that every scientist, regardless of her means and location in the world, can have access to all the latest research communication. In practice, that's hard to do, and people have to understand how it works before you start legislating on it.
So I think you can just take one more question.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm a graduate student here at MIT, and I'm from New Jersey.
Well, recognizing that all politics is local, where in New Jersey?
I grew up in Hightstown.
Hightstown. Well, was it actually in Hightstown or in East Windsor?
In Hightstown.
Okay. I never represented Hightstown per se, but East Windsor, all around Hightstown.
So my question has to do with communicating science to the public. And here at MIT, we do so much outreach. We do Nano Day at the Science Museum and Nano Observatory Day, where we invite people into our labs. And the two issues that I see in these is that people who come to these are already so inclined to bring their kids to these kind of things, and they'd already be interested in these topics anyway. And then the second issue is that when graduate students talk about their work, we tend to try to make it sound as complicated as possible because we like to kind of brag about what we're doing and make it seem like we're the only ones who can understand this. So my questions are, how can we overcome these by reaching a broader audience, like where to start in terms of that? And then how do you communicate to other graduate students that we want you to explain it as though you want the other person to understand?
No, great question. There is all kinds of psychology that goes into this science communication, and quite a bit of ethics too. But the most important point for me is that you don't do them, you may do them some service by getting them excited about the ideas and the beauty and the excitement, the adventure of science. You don't do them a service by trying to teach them the terminology, the methodology, the procedures. What they need more than anything, and this applies to even the interested audience that comes, they need to understand that science is a way of asking questions so that they can be answered empirically and verifiably. Every third grader can understand that. We beat it out of them as the years go by. And if you use that simple formulation, it will help you communicate what it is you are doing. Asking questions so that they can be answered empirically and verifiably, and for them to be, for the evidence to be verified, it has to be openly communicated. You have to put aside the human tendency not to want to be found to be wrong. And if you tell them this is what science is, this is how a scientist thinks, and you can too, then you're there.
Thank you.